Hi, my name is Dallas Baker, and I want to discuss the history of the Michigan School for the Deaf, located in Flint, Michigan. The Michigan School for the Deaf got salt lands way back in the year 1848. And those salt lands helped the school. And the school got the lands, and then they would sell the land to the people and accumulate the money for building and supporting the school. And the land was sold, and that money was also used for taxes, so it wouldn't burden the people of Michigan with taxes. So to know how the salt spring lands were used and what they exactly are, we have to go back to the year 1835, when Michigan was applying for statehood. Now, to become a state, you have to meet certain requirements. One of them is you have to have a big enough population, enough people living in Michigan. You have to have also a constitution established and agreed upon, and some other specific things to become a state. So that was offered to the state of Ohio. And the state of Ohio, the government said no. And the reason for that was when Ohio was becoming a state, there was some land, and then just a little bit north of Ohio, there was a city called Toledo. And the city of Toledo was a water port city. And back then, water was very significant because people didn't have cars or airplanes or trains. So water was sold and then used to buy important things. And then a little bit northwest, they had the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, where they divided the land within 5 states. So Ohio went right to the border, and then north of it was Michigan, and Detroit, and some other states. And a survey was taken to figure out how the land would be split up. The people of Michigan were in a rage. And the people of Michigan and Ohio got into a big argument. The people of Michigan did not want the people of Toledo to establish and control what was called the Toledo Strip. So when Michigan applied for statehood, and the Ohio government said no, the people of Michigan were in a rage. And the two states had a big clash. They would send soldiers in from each state and trying to figure out who could win. And it could have been labeled as the Toledo War. But in history, that war never happened. It was a small conflict, but it was a conflict nonetheless. Washington, D.C. also played as a mediator and try to help the two states agree. And Washington, D.C. asked Michigan if they could give up the Toledo Strip. And Washington told the Michigan government that they would give them the northern peninsula, the northern border. And at that time, it belonged to Washington, D.C., but they were willing to give it to Michigan. So the people of Michigan were kind of confused because they needed farming, they needed to grow food, they needed cattle. But the northern northern border wasn't good for farming. It was hard, full of mountains and hills, not good for growing food. It was really cold, and so the people of Michigan were very headstrong about giving up the strip and accepting the northern border. And so the Washington government also added and said, we'll give you the northern border, and if Michigan accepted, it could have been case closed, done and over with. But they also added 72 sections of salt lands to the agreement. And the government told Michigan that they could have these 72 sections of salt lands and that they can pick and choose which ones they want, as well as the northern border. So the government of Michigan debated, and Michigan had a lot of salt lands to begin with, but it was never used to its full potential. It was never developed. Michigan relied on importing goods and then paying for those goods. But now, if the Washington government is offering salt lands that they can pick and choose from, that's an opportunity to develop them, and to use them. And people could use it for flavoring their food, preserving food, and sprinkling it on their meats and such. And deep down in the ground, they had kind of a water pump that would spring out and move along the river, and so it would help the dry lands. And they could accumulate salt that way and then sell it. And in that system, it really means that the state relies on the land and goods. And so Michigan agreed, and the state became an official state January 4th, 1837. So that agreement to give the 72 sections of salt lands to the people were agreed upon, but they could not be sold until 10 years was finished. And then they could sell them and accumulate the money. So the people agreed, but not long after, they found copper and iron in the northern peninsula. And the mining of iron and copper really skyrocketed their economy. And the people were really amazed because they really didn't need money from the water pumps and everything because they had iron and copper. So in 1847, 1848, Michigan started talking about setting up a hospital, a mental hospital for the insane, and a school for the deaf and blind. And the school for the deaf and blind and the hospital had equal acres of land, about 140 acres. And then the next year, it was really hard selling the land, and so the school and the hospital got 10 more, 15 acres plus 10 more, which equaled about 25 acres, which had an equivalent of 16,000 acres to build and support the hospital and the school. And a lot of people know about the Northern Peninsula, the Toledo War, and everything, but no one ever talks about the Salt Lands and how that really helped the school develop and expand.